Well, I think we're ready to start now. So, good morning or good afternoon, depending whereabouts it is you are in the world today. I'm here to introduce our webinar on what is important when conducting CATI in 2019. I've got Phil Hearn here with me, who's going to take you through a short presentation. And unfortunately, Sandy, who you can see on the front here, isn't able to attend because there's been a tropical storm in Manila. But luckily enough, Phil is here to stand in for Sandy's part also. As always, there's a question and answer box at the bottom, so feel free at any point to type in any questions and we'll answer them as best we can at the end. So I shall pass over you to Phil now.
Thank you, Charlotte, and I'm afraid you've got me for the whole of this webinar today, as Sandy can't make it, unfortunately, as Charlotte said, due to the weather in Manila today. We're going to talk about CATI, and I'm going to break this webinar into two parts. First of all, a bit of background about the CATI market and some things that you might consider when purchasing or using CATI software. And for the second part, I'm going to take you through our own CATI solution. And I'm one of these people who's very honest about software, and I'd like to say that I don't think our CATI solution is the one for everybody, and I'm going to show you where I think it is the right solution for people, and that will be covered in this webinar today. So first of all, let's just talk about CATI generally in the market research world, and it's quite interesting. I've written a couple of blog posts recently and posted on a couple of forums about CATI, and I've had, I think, 3 or 4 comments back along the lines of, does anyone still do CATI? Hasn't CATI disappeared? Isn't everything online now? And so on. And there is a perception out there that CATI has diminished substantially, and it hasn't diminished as much as people perceive. And if we look at the SMR statistics for 2008, you'll find that about 17% of research spend is carried out by telephone CATI globally. And you'll also find that figure of 70% doesn't vary by much in most countries. Now, you might happen to be in a country where it does drop as low perhaps as 5%, but you equally might be in a country where it's in the 20% or even 30%. So CATI still is a substantial part of market research and is still the right tool for certain types of survey. We all know the problems with online surveys, they can't be too long, where you want an interviewer to be able to relate to the respondent. They're not obviously suitable. So CATI still is a medium that's used and hasn't diminished perhaps as some people's perception. I want to, in this webinar, first of all, just to talk about what are the choices you have when you buy CATI software. There's a number of suppliers out there offering CATI software, and one thing that has perhaps, again, not surprised me in some ways, but has in others, is that really the CATI market hasn't developed perhaps that much since the late 1990s, early 2000s. And that's possibly because there's not been a huge growth, but it's, as I say, it's still a substantial market, and there has been a rush to get everything online, and so most of the software development companies have tended to bring out new products that do new fancier things online rather than for CATI. But nonetheless, CATI is a very appropriate way for doing surveys sometimes. And let's look at the choices you get when you choose a CATI software, because there are some significant choices that can make all the difference. And the first thing is something I often talk about in my blog articles, and it doesn't just relate to CATI. This relates to pretty much all types of software in the market research field. Most tools in market research for different things, such as data collection, for online surveys, for tabulations, for charting and reporting, you get a choice whether you do this through scripting or whether you do it through a GUI, as it's called, or a graphical user interface, which effectively means a menu-driven type of system. So there are a number of CATI softwares out there that use a scripting language, and there's some that use a menu system. Each has their advantages. I will be honest about that. Our own software is a GUI, so it's driven by menus. Scripting has its place. Scripting, in my opinion, and this applies right across the spectrum of software in market research, has its advantages, and its major advantages are that you can be more productive if you've got the skilled people to use it. Now, you'll notice there's a couple of conditions put into that, if you've got the skilled people to use it, you will need probably higher paid people to use a scripting language. They probably need more training. And so if you're not running a large number of surveys, it might not be the right tool. If you're running, have a continual flow of CATI projects, scripting is probably the more efficient thing to do, provided you can recruit staff who are skilled enough to use a scripting language. Whereas perhaps at the other extreme, or to take it to the other side, you would use a GUI or menu-driven system if you run a small number of surveys, or perhaps one or two very big surveys, as I know some of our customers do, that are needing very minor changes, but don't need scripting every day. And typically with scripting software, and again, this applies to the whole spectrum of software in market research, if you've got someone who's scripting something just one day a month, unless they're doing lots of different types of scripting, they're probably not going to be very productive, and they're going to be quite slow, because the value of scripting is that there's shortcuts, there's ways of doing things, and building blocks of code that can do things that you regularly need, and that's where you get your efficiency. Whereas with a menu-driven system, it might take a little bit longer to do, but typically people using menu systems make less mistakes, don't have to ask or work out how to do things, because the software, if it's not totally intuitive, is usually at least semi-intuitive. And once you've done one project, you can do the second, third and fourth one very easily. So there is a distinct choice there between scripting and the GUI software, and that's something that you might want to consider when choosing software. The second choice that comes up is, do you want a piece of software that only does CATI, or do you want one that does something more than that? And that has some pluses and minuses both ways. There are many people who really don't care what the software can do besides collect the data efficiently over the telephone, and have a supervisor function that lets surveys be managed, because they already have in place the software that does all of their data analytics, whether that be tabulations, multivariate, charting, reporting, whatever it might be. They already have those tools in place, and all they want their CATI software to do is to collect the data efficiently, and obviously have supervisor functions so that that can be achieved. Other people want CATI to do a bit more than that. They want it to perhaps do some analysis, do some tables, maybe do some charts, maybe even go on to do some statistical analysis. So some people want their CATI software to do more than just actually collect the data. And both of these types of software usually, but not always, have all the tools you need to export the data to other formats. So to take QPS, for example, here, as we're going to cover later in this webinar, that has tools for doing all the tables that you might ever want, but you can export it as well if you want to the tabulation software of your choice. So if you're used to using something else, you can just export it, collect the data in QPS and export it. But if you want to run your tables in QPS, you can do that as well, whereas other software will just collect the data. And then I have sometimes come across something that I think something to watch out for, if you like. There are CATI software products that have what I call a full supervisor function, and then there's others that have what I call a partial or no a CATI supervisor function. And the sort of things to look for there are that the partial ones are possibly really more online data collection tools, where you're feeding in people to contact and making that perhaps the contact, the phone number, dialing it manually and collecting the results and entering it through an online data collection tool. I don't really call those products rather CATI software. They can certainly be good enough if you're running something that's quite small. So if you've got a project that's a one-off, perhaps where you want to run it as CATI and you only want perhaps 2 people interviewing, that might be a perfectly adequate tool for doing a CATI survey, something that's just more of an online tool with very limited supervisor function or no supervisor function, because you can manage the calls that are being made and the responses either semi-manually or through some other online tool to do that. But I think once you get beyond 2 or 3 interviewers handling work, you really do need a proper supervisor function. So again, I think there's a differentiation there between people who are perhaps doing a very small one-off CATI survey for a client and people who are running what I call a proper call center, where you have 2, 3, 5, maybe even 50 or 100 interviewers with multiple projects possibly running, and you want the projects coordinated. And this is something that's I want to talk about now, which is connectivity and system overload. Some systems can be very fast and some can be slow, and this is something that we feel is very important and is actually in fact unique to our QPS software, in that the way that QPS works is that it only talks to the server that's managing the studies or the surveys at the beginning and end of an interview, which means that when an interviewer is ready to conduct an interview, they talk to the server to get that respondent who they're going to contact or who's going to be dialed, whether it be manually or automatically, and only at the end of the interview do they send the information back to the server. This means that during the course of the interview, the interviewer is not accessing the server. They're working locally on their station for the whole interview, which means there's no, or almost no risk of any delays between questions, which of course is a really important issue on a survey. You don't want to be having interviewers saying, oh, can you just wait a minute, please, while the system catches up and sends me the next question. So as long as their own station is not doing any backups or anything strange that it shouldn't be doing, it's just dedicated to CATI, which of course is very easy to manage. They shouldn't have any delays, and you don't need a powerful server. Whereas pretty much every other CATI software on the market will talk to the server between each question. So question 1 is answered, it goes off and gets the question text for question 2, gets the answers to that, feeds that back to the server, gets the question text for question 3, and so on, so that the interviewers are constantly accessing the server. Now, in that particular scenario, you do need a much more powerful server, because interviewers are continually, if you've got more than 2 or 3, are continually accessing the server, and that is liable to slow processing down and cause those run that risk of delays between questions. And so your hardware costs go up in that situation. So I suppose as a generic here, what I'm trying to suggest is that always consider the cost of the hardware that you need to run your system effectively. All right, so we're going to look at, in the second half of my presentation at QPSMR's CATI system itself. And QPS, just to position that, it's a menu-driven system. So I've already made some comments about that menu-driven systems is an easy way to set up questionnaires. You get a slight penalty sometimes in that it might take a little bit longer than somebody who's scripting it, but they'll get the accuracy, so they'll win back on that. And it might reduce the number of shortcuts that you get that a scripter will get. But again, on the other hand, scripters have got to learn how to do it. They've probably got to be much more highly trained, probably more highly paid. And so there's a balance there between scripted and non-scripted. So QPSMR is a GUI menu-driven system. It's more than just CATI. It doesn't just do the CATI and the supervisor function. It has a full set of tools in it for doing tables. And in fact, I put reporting in there as well, in that there's a new toolkit coming out in August this year, which will allow you to go from your CATI surveys or your paper surveys, in fact the QPSMR, straight through to PowerPoint presentation. So that's something that's coming later this year. And I should add as well that QPSMR CATI also includes total free use of paper questionnaires being entered as well, if you want to enter and run your analysis on paper surveys. Has a full supervisor functionality, so a supervisor, for example, can manage quotas, can load sample, check on the progress of interviewers, and manage basically samples and staff. And as I mentioned, something that I think is really important that's often not considered, QPS has a very low load on the server. So that's the sort of profile of QPSMR CATI. So what we're going to see in a little while is how to set up your questionnaire and how to manage a CATI study. And that breaks down into some parts, and that's what I'm going to take you through in a minute. I'm not going to go into huge depth here because I don't want this webinar to run for 2 hours. It's not a training session. There are very good videos actually on our website that can explain how you set up a questionnaire and prepare it in very good detail on our website, and if you want links to those, we can obviously supply those. So a survey in QPSMR gets broken down into these bits. So the first bit that you often prepare is any questions that you're pulling through from the sample file. Now that can be anything from nothing to lots of data. So to take those extremes and explain that, you could have a sample file that just has a list of telephone numbers and you're actually pulling no other data through about your respondents to your survey data. You might more commonly have some basic information about your respondents or prospective respondents. So you'll have their telephone number, obviously, and you might have perhaps their some demographic details about their age, gender, region, or something like that. And you could pull those through into the survey and use them if you wish as filters. Or you could go to right up to the extreme there and you could pull through a lot of data from a previous survey. So what I'm thinking of here is where you perhaps do a pre and post test, where you could do a pre-test, store that data and keep that data with the sample data file so that you can do a post test and you could pull through data from the pre-test as part of the post-test survey, so that then you could really do some quite complex routing in your questionnaire. So at the post stage, you might know, let's keep it simple, you might know that someone was very dissatisfied with the service, but at the post stage, they were just quite satisfied. So you could actually then filter a question which said, for those people who were previously dissatisfied but were now satisfied, you could ask a question because you could pull through from the sample file the pre-test data that you'd collected. So when I say prepare sample questions, that can be anything from nothing to 1 or 2 demographics right through to a whole survey's data that you're pulling through and using perhaps to corroborate data or to use as filters in your survey. Then we're going to prepare the main questionnaire, or look at preparing the main questionnaire. So these are the questions that you would ask in the course of a normal questionnaire, just typical market research questions and rating scales and so on. And then we're going to put that together, the sample questions and the main questionnaire, with what I've called the control, which is the control that is actually going to manage your CATI interview. And that'll become a little bit more apparent in a minute. And what that will prepare for us is a final questionnaire. So they're the sort of 3 steps we're going to go through. Having produced our final questionnaire, we're going to look at preparing the sample data and then preparing the files for the survey and looking at how we can manage the CATI study overall. All right, so I'm going to come out of PowerPoint now and I'm going to move to a presentation of QPS. And we're first of all going to look at putting in some very simple questions. And just to show you what I've got ready for this particular survey, let's go down here. What we're going to work with in this particular demonstration is that I've got a sample file here which has got some people that we want to interview. So I'm just going to open that up in Excel. It's a CSV file, and this is going to be the people that we're ultimately going to interview. So I've got a fairly small sample here, I'd admit. I think it's just 30 people in this, yes, 30 people in this file. And we have to call the telephone number field telnum, and you'll see I've got some fields here called serial, name, address 123, postcode, telnum, member and event. So this is some data about my respondents, one meaning that they're a member of an organisation, two meaning they're not a member, and a one in the event here meaning they attended an event, and two meaning they didn't attend an event. So we've got some information about our respondents here. We've got their name over here, and we've got their telephone number. That telephone number field must be called telnum, and that's the only mandatory field in this particular file. So we need to tell QPS about these fields that we're going to pull through, the members and events. What do they mean? So I'm going to start a new project here. And I'm going to go into the system to put in the first question, and I'm going to copy the name of that field that you saw just now, member, and I can choose what type of question it is. Well, it's a single response question, and I'm going to choose it as a piece of data that I'm taking from the sample file, and I might want to use it in my quotas later. So if I do, I could check it there, and I can type in, and I can type in the text for that question, whether member of organisation, and I can insert the responses as yes and no. And so that is my first field, which I'm taking off the sample file. So remember, I'm first of all specifying the fields I want to take off the sample file. And the other field that I have here is event. So I'm going to put that information in now, insert an entry. Again, it should match the name of the field. It's single, did or whether attended event. And the responses for that are also yes and no. And I just forgot there to click that as a sample point. I'll make that part of the quota that I want. So that set up the two fields that have come through from my data file. Just going to save this. All right, and now we can put in some questions that might relate to our survey. So I might start with a question here, which is question 1. And you can see now that I've got a range of different types of questions that I can ask. They can be single, they can be multi, they can be numbers with or without a decimal point. They're curiously called weights, but then just numbers with or without a decimal point. I can collect character data. I can have an instruction for an interviewer. I can collect verbatim data so that information, so the text that, or the information that a respondent gives on the phone is sent straight to a CSV file that can be coded later on and merged with your survey data if you wish to. But here I'm going to just select single, and I'm going to say, do you own a bicycle? And when we look down here, you can see I've got a whole stack of options that I can use. I could choose to randomize the responses for this question. Well, that wouldn't be appropriate here because the answer is going to be yes and no. If I had responses I wanted to pull through from a different question, I could do that. Again, I don't want to do that. So, for example, if you were asking people which brands they were spontaneously aware of, you might want to either blank out the ones they've selected for the prompted awareness, or you might want to have them already checked so that they didn't have to ask them again. So things like pre-selecting and auto-selection responses are available. But in here, I can input my choices as yes and no again. And just in case you're wondering about the number of responses here, you can have up to 10,000. And you can see I've got a whole set of options here for each response. So if I wanted anybody who said no, not to continue, I could suspend input and that would close the questionnaire. So anybody who said no to question 1 would automatically get rejected from the survey. So click OK again and OK, and we've saved that question. And I can carry on in this way, setting up these questions. I could just quickly do another question. Make of bicycle owned. So this particular question, we're going to have different makes of bicycle. And just type in a few brands here. And just to show 1 or 2 of the features as I go along here, none of these single response only are present. So it's going to it's going to keep none of these as single response only if present. And I might keep it at the bottom so it's not randomized, so that when I randomize the responses, none of these stays at the bottom. Now, I'm not going to go through all the features that you've got in setting up your questionnaire. You've got all the features that you need, I can assure you. There's plenty of videos that will take you through that in detail. And if you've got any concerns, you can obviously write to us and we'll explain how everything's handled in QPS. But basically, all the tools you need are there for randomized responses, carrying responses through, carrying text through from previous questions, and indeed filtering as well. So I could filter this question here so that the only people who answered it were people who said yes at question 1. And I'll give it a name, FQ1, and apply it. And now this question is only asked of people who said yes at question 1. So you get a feel for how you set up a questionnaire. I've not shown you even a fraction of the tools you've got in there. You can randomize blocks of questions and so on. So all the tools you need there for managing a complex market research questionnaire are there. If you want to test your survey to see what it looks like, you can go into one of the test modes. At this stage, you might as well just test the paper input because it hasn't even thought about it being a CATI survey yet. So I can just test this. And you can see I'm going through the answers here. If I type 1 to question 1, it gives me the answers at question 2 and lets me choose multiple brands, but I can't choose multiple brands in none of these. So it all looks as though it's working. Although if I choose no here, you'll see that it's grayed out and skipped question 2. So that routing seems to be working. But basically, I go through the process of building a questionnaire which has the questions on my from my sample file and the main questions that form the body of my survey. So now we're going to look at how we put that together, and I've got something prepared already for this, of course. So I've got here what I call a skeleton QDF. So let me open that and explain what this is. Let's just open that. So this is a skeleton CATI QDF, and as you'll see, it's full of entries that begin with Z, mainly with ZZZ, not totally, but mainly with ZZZ. And what these entries are, these are the entries that control the CATI interview. So these are going to do things like, for example, time sections of your questionnaire. They're going to know when to call someone back if an appointment's made. So if someone starts an interview and after 5 questions says, actually, I'd like you to call me back tomorrow at 7 o'clock, these are the controls. They're going to store that information so that the system knows to make a call back to that particular respondent at 7 o'clock tomorrow. And in this file here, you'll find all of the controls that you can have. You don't need to use all of these. You can delete some of these. For example, here you'll see the information about the 9th callback is stored in these fields here. So this is the data relating to the 9th callback if somebody happens to make 9 callbacks. If you didn't want 9 callbacks and just wanted only 5 callbacks, you could just delete those fields by just going project delete, and they would only be called back up to 5 times. So you can see it's counting down 9 to 0. So this is storing the dates and times and the user who initiated each callback, starting with call 0, which is the initial call to an interviewer, up to 9 callbacks. And you can have more than that if you want more than that. I personally think that 9 is probably too many anyway. And in here, these controls are storing things like the appointment date, the appointment time, any comments you want to leave people. So perhaps if an interviewer started an interview and found a particular respondent to be difficult or in some way, or had some particular need, perhaps was hard of hearing or something like that, a comment could be stored here so that when the next interviewer the next day completes the survey or calls back, they're already aware of anything relating to this particular respondent. Last question number asked is stored here. So if we're calling back, the survey obviously then restarts at the appropriate question. So if a respondent gets up to question 6 one day, continues the interview the next day, it would just automatically restart at question 7. So all these ZZZ fields are storing information about the state of a survey, an individual survey, or controlling the actual survey as a whole. And so this is all handled by an administrator who would manage all this sort of thing. And you can see here, like, the length of the interview is also recorded. And if we scroll down a bit further, you'll see that the sections here where we enter questions that we want. So here, if I just expand that slightly, you can read that. So any entries here from the sample file go between these 2 fields. So this is where we put those 2 fields, member and event. And further down here, we've got TTT main and TT main end. In between these fields, we will put the questions which form the body of our questionnaire. And then finally, at the end here, we've got all the outcomes that can come from a survey. You can edit these to have more, but effectively they boil down into completed interviews, partial interviews, interviews where there's a failure for some reason. So that might be where somebody refused, it might be where the number's just not obtainable, it might be any number of reasons. Or a fourth one, of course, is where you're going to recontact because perhaps the number was engaged, no one answered, or an appointment was arranged. So these outcomes, you can edit these outcomes, but effectively they boil down to those different types of completed, partially completed, failed, and to try again later, effectively, or retries. And these outcomes here also contain messages. You can see here, for example, if the ending was one of these, you could say, thank you for your help. Unfortunately, some of your answers fall outside of the survey requirements, where if it was a successful interview, the interviewer would read out, that concludes the interview, thank you for your time, goodbye. So all those sorts of things can be controlled in here. Now what we do is that we paste into these sections the sample questions and the main parts of the questionnaire. So if I go to the full questionnaire, which was prepared here, so let's open that up. So you can see now that what we've got is all the fields prepared from the sample file. You may recall we had name, address 1, address 2, postcode, address 3, postcode, member and event. And then we've got 13 questions and some filters that relate to the body of our questionnaire. So what I would do, I would paste those into the sample part of the skeleton questionnaire and paste these into the main part of the questionnaire. And if I jump into this file here, you'll see that that's actually been done. So here's our skeleton questionnaire. And now you can see in here that I've pasted or already prepared are the questions from the sample file. The names must match the names, the headings in that sample file. And down here we've got the questions that form the body of the questionnaire put in that part. And so this particular file now, with that skeleton questionnaire added together with the sample file questions, added together with the body of the questionnaire or the main questions on the questionnaire, forms the questionnaire file, the QDF as it's called, question definition file, that you use to manage your whole survey. So this is everything together, which means we don't need the parts that formed it. We just need the full CATI questionnaire. Now I'm ready to move on as a supervisor or administrator to actually putting this survey together so that interviewers can work on it. And that's just a case of following 3 or 4 steps, which perhaps look complicated the first time you see it, but actually are very, very easy. They're just the same steps that you follow each time. And the way we do this is that we make a data file. So I'm going to open the data window. It knows that I'm Phil. And I'm going to make a file called, I'm going to call it Project X, and I'm going to call it Sample. And it tells me I haven't got this file yet. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to load my sample file into this folder here by updating it from that file we looked at earlier called people.csv. So let's open up people.csv. It's picked it up as a portable format, and I want to make a new questionnaire for each of those records in the CSV file. So what's happening here is that effectively QPS is converting that CSV file that had our sample into an ASCII file that's going to be used in our survey. And what you can think of being on that ASCII file, well, in fact, that's what's actually on that ASCII file, is just the data we have at the moment, which in this case will be their name, address, telephone number, whether they attended the event and whether they were members. All of the other fields are going to be empty. So it's waiting effectively to put in or superimpose all of the data that you're going to collect in the process of, or an interviewer is going to collect in the process of the survey. And what's going to happen with that data in terms of records in the data file is that the administrator here is setting this up. And then when an interviewer requests a record from the sample file, they're going to take that record and add to it the data that they collect as part of the survey. And that might just be an instruction to call back at a later time, or it might be the real survey data itself and an outcome, meaning that it was successful. In which case it will go to the completed record if it's successful, to the partial file if it's partially completed, or if it's a failed record because the number doesn't exist or something like that, it will go to the failed file and not be recontacted. Or if it's a retry because the number was engaged or didn't answer, it will go to the retry file to be attempted later. So I'm going to make that file there, and I've got some OKs here to check it's brought in everything correctly, that I've named all my fields correctly. I'm going to close that, and I'm going to close down this now and close my data entry. Now I could go into a test mode again like I did just now and test my questionnaire to make sure all my routing works correctly, and that's what one would do in the normal course of events so that you can run tests on this. But we're going to hope this is okay, and we're going to go on now to prepare this so that an interviewer can work on this project. So I'm going to now act as an interviewer, sorry, a supervisor, I apologize, and I'm going to go into the quota control. I'm going to create a quota file for this particular project. So this is Project X quota file. Okay, and now I'm going to edit those quotas. And you can see the questions that have been set up to for quotas are the member, non-member, attended event, not attended event. And let's say that for members, I want to get 30 respondents, I want 10 non-members, and I want 20 people who attended the event and 20 who didn't attend the event. So they're my quotas, and we'll see these fill up, of course, as the survey progresses. So as supervisor, I've set up my quotas. I'm now ready to issue this project to the interviewers. So I'm going to now distribute it. It's a telephone survey. I'm going to issue serial numbers. My sample file is project X sample. I've got quotas in project X quota.csv, and I'm going to output my full data to project X main, and I'm going to store the paths. And I'm going to make this project X CATI survey. So that's prepared the files now so that they're ready for interviewing. And now my interviewers can work on that. So I'm going to switch roles now. So interviewers would work on this file here, and you'd only give them access to this. Of course, you wouldn't let them have it. You'll probably put this in an area that they can reach, but they can't reach these parts. You don't want your interviewers changing the questionnaire. So if I was an interviewer now, I would be told to log into this, and it would confirm who I am, and I'm ready to start conducting telephone interviewing. And if I'm told to, from the members only, you can see I've only got 16 records available, and when I'm ready, I can get one from the sample. I've got this one here. If I've got an automatic dialer, it will automatically dial for you. I haven't got it on my computer, so I'm going to click the interview button, and I can now proceed with the interview. And if I'm willing to, I can confirm this information and answer the questions using my mouse here. Obviously, I'd ask these questions and collect the data. And hopefully we'll get to the end of this soon. Okay, so I've got to the end of the interview. It tells me it was a successful interview, and I could read it out to the respondent. That concludes the interview. Thank you for your time. Goodbye, which I remember reading just now. And we have completed that particular interview, and we can save it. And we're now ready to do another one. And let's say things don't go quite so well this time. Let's say this particular respondent, we start the interview, and after 2 questions, they say they're too busy today. So at this point here, they get to question 4, and they say, that, can we actually do this tomorrow? I can hit one of the F11 key, and I can either terminate it or I can continue it later. And if that respondent says, well, I'd like to actually do the survey at 7 o'clock tomorrow, and I don't mind any time within 30 minutes of that, maybe I can type 30 in there, and I can set high or low priority. I can say that only I contact that person, or someone else can do it, or anybody can do it. So I've got a whole set of tools here I can use for controlling when that person's called back and who contacts them, and indeed the supervisor can control that. And that will end that interview, and it'll just say, thank you for your help so far. As agreed, we'll call again tomorrow at 1900. So that completes that interview, and that interview then would appear tomorrow automatically as part of somebody's work when it's the appropriate time. So that gives you a quick introduction to how an interviewer works and how you can carry out an interview and set appointments for other projects. You can also, with this system, customize exactly what reporting you get. So as a administrator or supervisor, you can decide exactly what reporting is produced. So I think I've got a project open here. Here we go. So this particular project is pretty much the same project. We have actually carried out 10 interviews on this one rather than just the 1 or 2. So I can open some tables that have been prepared here, and I could customize these to be what I like. So this particular report is not particularly interesting, but it tells me that I've conducted 10 interviews on this survey. 4 were members, 6 were non-members, and my average interview length was 64 seconds, and the longest interview took 146 seconds, and the shortest took 10 seconds. And basically, in analysis here, I can use any of the fields on my data, so the length of the interview, who conducted the interview, what answers were given to key questions, whether people who answered different sections of the questionnaire took longer than others, any of the data that's in the full survey or as part of the control for the survey, how many callbacks they took on average, all that sort of data. I can set up tables like this so that I can get a very complete analysis of the progress of my project. And as a supervisor, I can go into my quota control and I can see at any one time how things are going. So I can look in here. I think actually I used the wrong quota file just now. So let me just go back here and view the quota file. Yes, I did. I picked the wrong quota file. So for this project, we can see that there's 30 members on the file. 2 have been saved so far, so it needs 28 more. And the non-attendees, we want 20. We've got 2 already, so we need 18 more. We could have more fields in here, of course, but this one's only got 2 quotas it's trying to satisfy. These could be age, gender, age within gender, whatever you like. And indeed, the supervisor could change these quotas at any one time and could feed interviewers or all the interviewers particular quotas that you're running not so well on. So if you're finding that you're struggling to get non-members, for example, you might set your interviewers up so that they only interview non-members to boost a quota that's flagging or is behind schedule. So I'm going to stop there. I've given you an insight into what QPS looks like, how it positions itself in the QPS market, where QPS positions itself, what things you have to do to prepare your questionnaire. That was all very quick. It was all done in about half an hour, the actual presentation of the software. There's obviously a lot more to it. There's a lot more videos and a lot more tools that you can avail yourself of to be able to build a full questionnaire and a full survey. If anybody wants this to play with, though, or to try, they're obviously welcome to do that. But I'll hand back to Charlotte now to see whether she's got any questions that have come in during the course of the sessions, and I'll do my best to try and answer them in the remaining 10 minutes.
Hi, thanks, Phil. Yeah, we've got a few that have come through here. I've got, can you have 2 supervisors?
Yes, you can. Yes, no problem with that. Both from a licensing point of view and a usage point of view, you can have as many people supervising as you want to. So yes, there's no restriction on that. They ought to be talking to each other if both of them are changing the quotas, of course. But yeah, that's not a problem. So yes, that's fine.
Right. Okay. Thank you. And how can I check that all the features I need for my questionnaire are included in this software?
I think probably I would suggest that you get in contact with Charlotte. There's about 30 videos that show you how to set up a questionnaire and all the features that you've got. Some of those deal with analysis, but there's another set of about 6 videos that cover what I've done in this half an hour in a bit more detail. So if you'd like to contact Charlotte, she'll gladly send you a list of all the videos, but there's a very complete set of videos that show you what I've done today, but in sufficient detail so that you can follow it through and understand the detail a little bit more. So yeah, there's a good set of videos, and of course we run training when people go on board as well. So you'll find everything you want there though to do your CATI surveys. I can't think of anything that people have not have found missing.
Thank you. Can I change quotas during field work?
Yeah, you can do that. No problem with that. You can edit this while people are working, and it would respond immediately. So no, that's fine. You can do what you want. Yeah.
Yep. Just got a couple more here. Is there a limit to the number of records in a sample file? Can I have 2 sample files?
2 questions there. So no, there's no limit. We have clients who literally have thousands in their sample file, and you 2 sample files. It will take data from 1 sample file. I'm wondering why you want 2 sample files. You can certainly switch sample files. So if you want to, conduct your survey from sample file 1 for a while and then switch it to sample file 2 at some point, that's easy to do and would happen pretty much instantaneously. Why you'd want 2 on the go at the same time, I don't know. Perhaps we either need that question in a bit more detail to understand why, but you can certainly join them together. So if you've got 2 sample files that have come from different sources, there's no problem loading them together, and you could even do that in Excel, of course, just load them together. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. If not, please get in contact with us.
All right, thank you. And the final one I've got here is, how many projects can you run at the same time?
As many as your computer will support. So there's no limit to the number that QPS will support. You would need to make, if you've got a lot of interviewers doing a lot of projects, you just want to make sure you had powerful enough system to manage that number of files being open at the same time, but no limit. So we can certainly help you with on the hardware side and what we recommend. But as I did say earlier, QPS needs less in terms of powerful hardware than pretty much any other CATI system, because of its unique design where it's not accessing the server as much as other systems are. So yeah, no problem. As many projects as you like, and the licensing allows unlimited projects and unlimited supervisors and unlimited records. So yeah, no problems there.
Great, that's all the questions I've got here for today.
Okay.
So yeah, I guess I've recorded the session, so what I can do is I'll send out tomorrow the recording to everyone so they can go back and watch it again. And thanks everyone for joining.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thanks, goodbye.